All right, everyone. Again, Dr. Andy Riggle, Meredith Thomas's dissertation chair, along with Dr. Patty Davis, her subject matter expert. This is the oral defense for Meredith Thomas. The title of her dissertation is Enhancing Divergent Thinking Among Gifted and Talented Students Through Targeted Instructional Approaches in K through 6 Clustered Classes. I would ask all of the guests to please mute themselves, just so we don't have any extraneous noises while Meredith presents her dissertation. So what's going to happen is Meredith is going to present, and she's going to work through her slides, sharing the highlights of her dissertation. At the conclusion, myself as well as Dr. Davis will ask her some questions. And at the conclusion of our questions, I will turn it over to the audience for any questions that all of you may have. So that's kind of the agenda for today. This is so exciting. I've known Meredith for several years now. I think she attended at least 10 boot camps. Just kidding. I think it was 2. So I've gotten to know Meredith extremely well. She is an extremely hardworking student, and I'm so excited to hear this presentation today. So with that, Meredith, I want to turn it over to you. It's all yours.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and I want to acknowledge my committee, Dr. Riggle, my SME, Dr. Davis, and my academic readers, Dr. Lloyd and Dr. Shaw. Well, welcome to my dissertation. I have a lot of friends, family, coworkers on this call today, and I want to thank each of you for joining in. I'm honored to have you here. A special thank you to Dr. Walker Roberts and my squad for all your help and support throughout this journey. My name is Meredith Thomas, and I bring over 2 decades of educational expertise, teaching all grade levels from kindergarten to high school. Initially a music teacher, my passion for nurturing exceptional abilities led me to gifted education. So currently, I serve as a gifted and talented specialist in New Jersey with supervisory and principal certifications, enriching my professional profile. As a published author, I integrate a wealth of knowledge into my practice. And outside of my career, I cherish my role as a wife and mother, sharing life's journey with my 3 wonderful daughters and a supportive family. And of course, I want to thank everyone here listening as I try to condense 3 years of classes, a year and a half in research, 57,406 words on 244 pages, down to about 40 minutes. I want to provide a bit of background for my topic. My degree is a Doctor of Philosophy degree, so I will begin with my philosophy. My philosophy is rooted in Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence, and I'll explain that theory in more detail in just a little bit. But the main idea here is that Sternberg advocates for developing the whole child. This theoretical underpinning aligns with my philosophy on the purpose of gifted education. The purpose of gifted education is to foster transformational giftedness, which combines high intellectual ability, creativity, and practical skills to affect positive change in the world. Classroom instruction can significantly boost gifted and talented students' academic growth and achievement if traditional teaching methods are enhanced through curriculum to promote divergent thinking. And researchers suggested that improving evaluation methods and increasing government oversight of gifted programs can unlock the full potential of these students, leading to substantial future societal contributions. One way of executing gifted and talented programming is through a technique we call cluster grouping, and I will discuss that in a little more detail later. The gist of that cluster grouping promotes differentiated instruction and diverse learning environments. Targeted instructional approaches in gifted and talented cluster classes focus on activities typically designed to foster academic growth. In this study, I examined targeting the cognitive domain of divergent thinking, a component of creativity. The gap in the literature was that although gifted and talented students who participate in these special programs have slightly improved standardized test scores, there's insufficient focus on divergent thinking, developing this non-traditional talent, such as original idea generation. Reliable tests to assess these creative abilities are available, but they're not being used appropriately or frequently enough to measure creative progress or identify children with divergent ways of thinking. A number of experts are strongly advocating for these programs to consider a child's entire range of abilities, including their critical and measurable capacity for creative thought. So, as I identified this gap in the research, I focused on the following problem. The problem addressed in this study was the lack of evidence-based instructional approaches for developing divergent thinking in gifted and talented students within heterogeneous K-6 cluster classes. And the purpose of this quantitative quasi-experimental study using a pre-test, post-test, and controlled treatment group design was to investigate the effect of an instructional approach for developing divergent thinking in gifted and talented students within heterogeneous K-6 cluster classes. So first, a few key terms. Divergent thinking is a creative process where one explores multiple unique solutions to a problem, often deviating from conventional methods to generate new ideas, like finding unconventional uses for everyday objects. Creativity involves creating new ideas, theories, and methods. Creativity is characterized by fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration. And while all divergent thinking is creative, not all creative thinking is divergent. Gifted and talented children are those identified by qualified individuals who outperform their peers and require specialized educational programs to help them reach their full potential. Underachieving is a social adaptation. It's the gap between what a student can do and what they are producing. And we typically see this phenomenon in core classes, core areas, instead of scenarios where we're engaging gifted and talented students in divergent thinking. Underachieving is very common among gifted and talented students and relevant to this study because when gifted and talented students underachieve, they can be difficult to identify for gifted and talented services. And cluster classes combine students of different abilities, including small groups or clusters of about 3 to 5 gifted and talented students into one class, allowing for focused teaching to meet the specific needs of gifted and talented teachers while keeping a diverse environment. This study addresses 4 research questions. Research question 1 is, to what extent does a targeted divergent thinking instructional approach affect divergent thinking within heterogeneous K-6 cluster classes? The null hypothesis states there is no statistically significant difference, while the alternative hypothesis states there is a statistically significant difference. Research question 2 asks, to what extent does a targeted divergent thinking instructional approach affect divergent thinking among gifted and talented students within heterogeneous K-6 cluster classes? The null hypothesis states there is no statistically significant difference, while the alternative hypothesis states there is a statistically significant difference. Research question 3 is, to what extent does a targeted divergent thinking approach compared to a control group affect divergent thinking within heterogeneous K-6 cluster classes? The null hypothesis states there is no statistically significant difference, while the alternative hypothesis states there is a statistically significant difference. And finally, the last research question is, to what extent does a targeted divergent thinking instructional approach compared to a control group affect divergent thinking among gifted and talented students within heterogeneous K-6 cluster classes. The null hypothesis states there is no statistically significant difference, while the alternative hypothesis states there is. So the theoretical framework used to guide the development of the problem, purpose, and research questions in this study was Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence. And this theory presents a layered understanding of intelligence split into three core elements: analytical, creative, and practical intelligence. And in this image, you'll notice three popular educational theories related to giftedness, creativity, and intelligence. And while there are elements of all three of these frameworks, Sternberg's theory encompasses a more complete understanding of these characteristics of intelligence. It particularly highlights the cultivation of divergent thinking, a skill crucial for gifted and talented students, and it aligns with the theory's emphasis on creative intelligence. My study is anchored in this theory as I investigated instructional methods to bolster divergent thinking among gifted students in various classroom environments. So this concludes my introduction and foundation of the study. Before delving into my study, I conducted a thorough literature review. This literature review included well over 100 scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles and meta-analyses covering many related topics, but I will discuss only these two major ideas today. So while most researchers agree on how to identify gifted and talented students and what their characteristics are, there is no universal programming options for gifted and talented students, but several common models are accessible. Most of us are probably familiar with the gifted and talented pull-out models, where students receive specialized lessons in self-contained settings, usually about once per week. Cluster grouping is a technique where small groups of 3 to 5 gifted and talented students, called clusters, are in the same mixed ability class with a teacher trained in gifted education strategies. And differentiated instruction is a teaching approach that tailors learning experiences to meet individual students' needs, abilities, and interests. Creativity is marked by 4 characteristics. Fluency, which is the number of ideas a person can produce. So for example, how many things can you think of in the shape of a circle? Flexibility, which is the ability to see things in different ways. So for example, how many ways other than wearing them can you think of to use a sneaker? Originality, which is the ability to solve problems in novel ways. Usually these are individuals who see things within a broader context. So they don't see the edges of the page as a boundary when they draw, for example. And elaboration. Elaboration is embellishing or extending what has already been created. So creative individuals with high levels of elaboration tend to have a lower tolerance for symmetry. They add details in interesting, often imbalanced ways. Divergent thinking is one way we solve problems. So when we consider what divergent thinking is, let's first think about its counterpart, convergent thinking. If you can imagine your mind with all its knowledge and ideas represented by different colors of Play-Doh, convergent thinking is like solving problems by drawing upon all the different lumps of Play-Doh in your mind. We take a little bit of it from our ideas and knowledge we already have and compress all the different pieces into one ball of Play-Doh. My ball of Play-Doh will look different from yours, which is why it's still considered creative problem solving, but ultimately we end up with one correct answer, or in this case, one lump of Play-Doh. Divergent thinking, on the other hand, is seeing problems as more of a jigsaw puzzle. And when we solve problems divergently, we break the puzzle up into dozens of pieces. Then you choose one piece of the puzzle and design a whole new jigsaw puzzle around it. This demonstrates the idea of divergent thinking. Including norm reference creativity tests in student assessment acknowledges the varied intelligence and expressions and captures the potential and growth of giftedness in students from all backgrounds beyond conventional academic indicators. So given the absence of research focusing on divergent thinking as a way of measuring the effectiveness of gifted education, this study fills a gap in the literature. So let's delve into the study. A quantitative methodology, quasi-experimental, pre-test, post-test control treatment group design was selected for this study. I chose quantitative methodology because I collected data through numerical means and tested hypotheses, which can be analyzed statistically. I used real-world educational settings with student participants from intact classrooms in pre-existing cohorts where pure random assignment was not feasible, so my study is quasi-experimental. I used independent and paired samples t-tests because the same group of students took a pre-test and post-test, and I needed to compare the results within and between each group to find potential changes in the students' divergent thinking abilities. So the sample population consisted of students of all abilities from various New Jersey public schools. To calculate the number of student participants I would need for my study, I conducted a power analysis. Power is identified as the probability of correctly rejecting a false null hypothesis. So null just means status quo. If there is an effect and I did not find it, this is called a type 2 error, and it's denoted as 1 minus beta. So a high power is desirable as it indicates a greater likelihood of detecting a true effect or difference. Hence, I aimed for 90% power. The sample size calculation utilizing G-Power software for an a priori power analysis of two-tailed paired and independent samples t-tests incorporated a Cohen's d effect size of 0.5, and this effect size reflects a significant difference as per Cohen's conventions. The Bonferroni correction was applied to maintain stringent control over type 1 error rates given the multiple comparisons, adjusting our alpha level to 0.025 and requiring a sample size of 202 student participants to detect statistical significance. This comprehensive power analysis and sample size determination approach ensured robust detection and capabilities for the intended statistical tests. I recruited 280 student participants, and after losing 11 students to attrition, I conducted my analysis on 269 student participants, surpassing the minimum number needed to show statistical significance. On a broader scale, we'll consider the state demographics. About 1.3 million students attend New Jersey public schools, and an estimated 91,000 require gifted and talented services. This means about 7% of New Jersey students require gifted and talented services. Of the 269 student participants I analyzed, 38 were identified as gifted and talented, which is about 14%. The students in my study were recruited from various school districts in Monmouth, Somerset, and Union counties in New Jersey. And while every effort was made to recruit more diverse school districts, I was successful in recruiting students from districts with limited diversity in upper middle class areas. And initially, I saw this as a limitation, but after completing the study, I found the results easier to generalize to a specific population. Delimitations are choices I made in the research to establish the scope of my study, and this may affect the study's results. So, for example, one delimitation is the instrument I selected to measure divergent thinking, the Williams Creativity Assessment Packet. I selected this instrument instead of any other creativity test available for a few reasons. The test is self-scoring and inexpensive, making its use feasible for this study. It's still widely used in public and private schools, extracurricular programs, and state-mandated identification criteria. Dr. Frank Williams, who wrote the Williams Cap, also published the reference text encompassing this study's targeted instructional approaches and lessons. So these characteristics made the Williams Cap an ideal instrument for this study. Another delimitation was the decision to collect my data from New Jersey schools instead of schools nationwide. And I did this because I'm familiar with the gifted and talented laws and structures in my home state, and I have a lot of professional connections from which I could draw my sample. An assumption in research is like a starting belief or an educated guess that researchers make about conditions or situations before they start their study, which they don't actually have concrete evidence for, but we generally accept them as true to move forward. So one assumption was that the teachers administered the assessments and integrated the instructional strategies with fidelity. And the other assumption was that the gifted and talented students in the classes were appropriately identified within heterogeneous classes. The instrument to measure divergent thinking was the Williams Creativity Assessment Packet, also called the Williams Cap. The Williams Cap requires the test takers to blend 12 abstract stimuli into a unique image and title each drawing. So you can see an example of one of these stimuli on this slide. Students need colored pencils or crayons for this test to add additional detail and color as they want. And the test takers have about 20 minutes to finish as many frames as possible. Each image receives scores in fluency, flexibility, originality, elaboration, and the title. Within the flexibility subtest, test administrators needed to determine which of these 5 categories the image fits into. Living, which is anything that grows or has a face. Utility, which is anything we use, so food, tools, clothing, furniture, and so on. Mechanical things are those depicting anything made by people that move on their own, so cars, boats, robots, etc. Symbols are responses depicting letters, numbers, flags, etc. And finally, view represents anything depicting scenery, so cityscapes, sunsets, snowflakes, etc. And so students can earn points each time they change from one. Limitations are characteristics beyond my control that could potentially impact the study's results. So the Williams Cap has some limitations. So for instance, some prompts were difficult to score if the students created images unfamiliar to the scorer or items fitting into multiple flexibility categories. For example, the picture on the left shows a person on a ladder. So was the student depicting a fireman climbing the ladder to rescue someone? Or was the person on the ladder to demonstrate that the student saw the stimulus as a ladder? The student's title, Rescue, does not clarify the student's intent. I overcame this challenge by remaining consistent with the student responses, including taking each response in the test's context. So for example, if a depiction could be 2 possible categories, I considered how the category would affect scoring when compared to the following response. Counting anything with a face as living, unless the face is part of something unrelated to the living category. So for example, a snowman has a face, but it counts as view. Or a face on someone carrying a box as depicted in the image on the right. It didn't count as living because the student attempted to convey the stimulus as a box depicted in the student's title for the prompt. And the other limitation is scoring procedures. The manual states that test administrators must use raw scores when calculating the composite score and interpreting student performance on the test. This procedure raised concerns about increasing the chances of a type 1 error. The raw score procedure raised specific concerns because students who took their time, answered fewer questions, and provided high-quality responses and earned lower composite scores than those who seemingly rushed through the test to complete all 12 prompts to the detriment of their responses. So, for example, here's one pre-assessment response from a student participant. On the same prompt, one of the student's classmates created this response, and the difference in quality is clear. On the post-test, we see significant improvement from the student on the left, with details filling the whole square and a colorful depiction of a snake in its habitat. However, the classmate on the right, who also drew a snake, appears to have made little to no progress since the pre-assessment. The student on the left answered 6 prompts on the post-test and earned a composite raw score of 62. The student on the right, who answered all 12 prompts, earned 63 points. So the first time I ran the statistical tests yielded a decrease in scores, increasing the likelihood of a type 1 error. To mitigate this limitation, I standardized the scores by calculating an average score per question and multiplying this average score by the number of items on the test. So using the converted scores, I ran the statistical analyses. The independent variable measured at the nominal level was the instructional approach used in the study. It encompassed 2 groups, the treatment group, who received the method, and the control group, who did not receive the method. The dependent variable, measured at the ratio level, was the divergent thinking abilities across each group. Before initiating research in each school district, I screened eligibility by confirming adherence to the research criteria, including cluster grouping, gifted and talented program alignment with best practices and state legal requirements, and at least 2 teachers willing to facilitate the research. After initial screening, I obtained approval from the Board of Education for each school district. Then I submitted documentation of site permission for each school to the National University IRB and began recruiting teacher facilitators. After giving consent, teacher facilitators received training on administering the Williams Creativity Assessment Packet. Teacher facilitators in the treatment group received weekly training on adapted Williams method pedagogical techniques through the 8-week duration of the study, where they learned strategies for teaching divergent thinking, discussed and troubleshot any challenges, and they shared ideas with other teacher facilitators involved with the study. Control group teachers, facilitators did not receive this training during the study, but had the opportunity to take the training after data collection. In this study, intact mixed ability classes were randomly assigned to either a control or a treatment group. All teacher facilitators administered the Williams CAP Form A as the pretest, and before we implemented the intervention. Teachers documented any irregularities occurring during testing and promptly mailed the completed tests to me using the postage paid envelopes provided to them. The treatment group teacher facilitators conducted an 8-week instructional period using the integrated strategies, which included strategies from Williams texts adapted to modern teaching conventions. After the 8 weeks, all teacher facilitators administered the Williams CAP Form B as the post-test, and following the same protocol as the pre-test, mailed the completed post-tests to me, indicating any irregularities occurring during testing, and treatment group teacher facilitators completed a 1-question survey about how much time their students were exposed to the teaching strategies during the 8-week treatment period. Treatment group student participants received between 30 and 60 minutes of exposure to the treatment each week. Then teacher facilitators received 6 hours of professional development and $50 Amazon gift cards funded by the researcher. Utilizing independent and paired samples t-tests, I conducted non-directional hypothesis testing following the methodology outlined by Coleman, using IBM SPSS software to analyze the test results. I compared aggregate treatment group student changes from pre-test to post-test scores, and treatment group gifted and talented students pre-test and post-test scores. Then I compared the aggregate treatment group to the aggregate control group post-test scores. And finally, I compared the gifted and talented students in the treatment group to their gifted and talented counterparts in the control group. IRB approval was received on November 21st, 2023. There were no significant risks to participants. Information letters were sent to student participants' caregivers who had the option of removing their students' data from the study. And I collected data anonymously and stored it on an encrypted computer and password-protected cloud account. And here are the results. With research question 1, I rejected the null hypothesis. The aggregate treatment group encompassed 133 students, including students of all ability levels. And given that the obtained p-value, which stands for probability, was less than 0.001, the null hypothesis of no effect is rejected, indicating a significant effect of the treatment. These findings corroborate the hypothesis that the treatment condition enhanced divergent thinking among students of all ability levels in K6 cluster classes. With research question 2, I failed to reject the null hypothesis. The gifted and talented students in the treatment group encompassed 21 students. But since the obtained p-value was greater than 0.05, I failed to reject the null hypothesis of no effect from the treatment group. Now, given the small sample size of only 21 students, this failure to reject the null hypothesis could partly be attributed to the insufficient power to detect a true effect. However, it is important to note that the mean scores did increase by more than 5 points, showing a positive trend, possibly from the treatment. With research question 3, I rejected the null hypothesis. The combined mixed ability treatment and control groups encompassed 269 students. Given that the obtained p-value was less than 0.001, the null hypothesis of no effect is strongly rejected, indicating a statistically significant difference in the post-test mean scores between the treatment group, which received the divergent thinking instructional approach, and the control group, who did not receive the instructional approach. This result supports the alternative hypothesis, proposing significant changes in divergent thinking within heterogeneous K6 cluster classes attributable to the targeted divergent thinking instructional approach. And for the 4th research question, I rejected the null hypothesis. For gifted and talented students in the treatment and control groups, they encompassed 38 students. The gifted and talented students in the treatment group demonstrated a post-test mean score 16.560 points higher than their control group gifted and talented cohort. The obtained p-value of 0.002 rejects the null hypothesis. This result indicated a statistically significant change in divergent thinking abilities among gifted and talented students who received the targeted instructional approach compared to those in the control group who did not receive the targeted instructional approach. Thus, the data supported the alternative hypothesis, affirming the instructional approach effectively enhanced divergent thinking among gifted and talented students. And for those of you who are more visual, here's a broad scale graph showing the results from the pre-test in gray to the post-test in turquoise. And as you can see, the aggregate treatment group on the left showed clear improvement, while the control group on the right showed no improvement. So from these results, we can draw some conclusions. Most notably, we can conclude that students of various ability levels benefit from instructional strategies targeting divergent thinking. Gifted and talented students exhibit notably more significant growth with these strategies than their aggregate peers. As a result, divergent thinking can be utilized as a metric to assess gifted and talented students' continuous development, and by extension, the effectiveness of gifted and talented programs beyond traditional academic measures and retrospective evaluations. So with research question 1, this finding highlights the transformative power of teaching divergent thinking in primary education. So by implementing targeted instructional strategies within K-6 cluster classrooms, we've witnessed a notable amplification of students' divergent thinking abilities. This aligns with Sternberg's triarchic theory, emphasizing that intelligence, particularly creativity, is dynamic and can be cultivated through educational practices. With research question 2, the findings present both confirmations and complexities in enhancing divergent thinking. So despite not finding a statistical significance, the positive trends in the mean scores from the pre-test to the post-test signaled the promise that these strategies to enhance divergent thinking. This reflects a need for a larger scale study for a definitive assessment. With research question 3, the implications gleaned from these results are quite impactful. It showcases the significant effect of divergent thinking strategies in heterogeneous K-6 cluster classes. The stark difference in divergent thinking capabilities between our treatment and control groups support the malleability of creative intelligence, which is a core component of Sternberg's theories. The findings provide strong empirical evidence that educational methodologies prioritizing the development of creative intelligence, specifically divergent thinking, are indeed effective. And then the fourth research question takes us deeper into the specialized field of gifted and talented education. The data revealed a significant increase in divergent thinking abilities among gifted and talented students who engaged with the treatment. This firmly supports the hypothesis that divergent thinking, particularly within gifted and talented students, is present and amenable to deliberate development strategies. The gifted and talented students in the treatment group showed a greater difference from the control group than their chronological peers in the same cohort. So the implications for educational policy and curriculum development are profound. The findings call upon stakeholders to reevaluate their curricular priorities, perhaps to afford more space for activities that develop divergent thinking. This result suggests that when we talk about nurturing giftedness, we must include cultivating and measuring divergent thinking as a critical component. So as we consider the margins of error for these implications, we need to consider the threshold for detecting how applicable these findings are, called the power, and the level of confidence that these implications are accurate, which is known as the significance. The achieved power of the study suggests that there's a 10% chance that a type 2 error may be present. This means the treatment worked even more than we think it did, but I did not detect the effect in my findings. So that's 1 minus beta. The significance level of the study suggests that a 2.5% chance exists that a type 1 error may be present. This means I detected an effect from the treatment when one does not actually exist. The type 1 error is more detrimental to the implications, but as you can see, much less likely. Based on the findings and implications, I have some recommendations for practitioners to bring these results to life. There is a need for systematic assessment of divergent thinking to effectively measure divergent thinking progress and to identify and nurture gifted and talented students in cluster classes, especially because they showed more significant growth than their chronological peers. Daily divergent thinking exercises can be differentiated to cater to various learning styles. For example, Mary Meeker's modalities included 3 ways to deliver targeted divergent thinking instructional lessons. And as other researchers have shown, divergent thinking is correlated with overall academic performance. So enhancing this domain benefits students of all ability levels. Integrating these practices introduces key terminologies related to thinking to our students, which enhances students' ability to think about their thinking, which is known as metacognition. Metacognition helps students retain what they learn and talk about what they're thinking about. So introducing vocabulary related to creative thinking and using strategies like explaining how students can be more fluent, flexible, original, elaborate, and imaginative encourages students to reflect on their thought processes, improving their problem-solving skills and learning efficacy. And then given the findings and implications, I recommend teacher training on divergent thinking strategies to enhance instructional practices and student outcomes. I recommend developing curriculum modules that challenge students to push their creative boundaries. Through regular interaction with these modules and measurement of their impact, this recommendation emphasizes the need for formative assessment in gifted programs. Finally, these results and implications are a call to action for addressing equity issues in program identification and fostering an environment valuing diverse cognitive abilities. In gifted education, where minority students are grossly underrepresented, creativity and divergent thinking assessments are used as identification criteria. So promoting these integrated strategies helps those students develop the skills we measure for this purpose. In the same way, students with access to academic enrichment and tutoring programs have the opportunity to enhance the content-specific identification measures used to identify students for gifted and talented programs. So adopting these recommendations contributes to the positive impact on student cognitive abilities and the long-term goal of cultivating innovative thinkers capable of contributing to society, which is transformational giftedness. Looking ahead to future studies, I recommend replicating this same study using different creativity assessments like the Torrance tests of creative thinking to validate these findings and further enrich the comparative data set. There's a critical need for revising the scoring system of the Williams Cap to more accurately measure creativity, including addressing scoring equivalence issues and the proposal to standardize scores. I would even add that there should be another measure added to the scoring mechanism to account for the time spent on each prompt and its impact on student scores. And while the Williams Cap is self-scoring and culture fair, I highly recommend modifying the Williams Cap format to accommodate students with special needs better. For example, printing each prompt on a separate page to minimize distractions and cognitive overload is one way to address this. Leveraging artificial intelligence to interpret and identify students' responses on each prompt can also contribute to accessibility for those with fine motor challenges and those with exposure to items that test administrators are unfamiliar with. So to wrap up this study's overall conclusions, this study underscores the need for a data-driven approach to nurturing creativity, proposing a curriculum and teaching practices shift. These findings enrich the triarchic theory of intelligence by empirically supporting the nurturing of creative intelligence. The study indicates the benefits of blending traditional and innovative methods to enhance divergent thinking among gifted and talented students. Enhancing divergent thinking in gifted and talented students supports the development of innovative solutions and societal progress, also known as transformational giftedness. And empirical evidence challenges existing paradigms, highlighting the effectiveness of specific instructional strategies on divergent thinking, giving us a potential way to formatively measure gifted and talented student progress within gifted and talented programs, and allowing practitioners to evaluate the effectiveness of their programs afforded to their students. Thank you for your attention. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Meredith. Well, I'm a little choked up. Sorry, that was outstanding. Got me all choked up there. I wanted to tell everybody we have 33 participants on this call. That's an outstanding number. So I wanted to thank all of you. Very appreciative for your attendance. And I wanted to thank Meredith for a very informative, efficient, wonderful presentation. But at this time, I want to turn it over to Dr. Davis for any questions or comments. Dr. Davis, the floor is all yours.
I'm a little speechless also, and I've known Meredith for several years, and we have geeked out together over gifted education so many times. I shared with her my very first teaching job, and my first master's degree was in gifted education. And all those people that she's talked about, the Meekers and Bob Sternberg, and those were my colleagues back in the day. And so they would be so proud of you, Mary and Bob, and Meredith, is just amazing work. And I wish I had invited Bob Sternberg, because he needs to see this presentation and he needs to read your final results. So I know I just dated myself by sharing all that information, but the mantle has been passed on to you with their work, and this is exemplary work. So I could totally get into the details of all of this, Meredith, and I want to do that with you, but I want to look at a broader picture right now, because you and I both believe in divergent thinking and the importance of it, but how do we stress that with the greater population? How do we convince teachers, based on your research, that they should use divergent thinking strategies in the classroom?
Well, the training of these, there's a few ways we can do this. We can train teachers, but I think before we do that, we need to offer them some kind of buy-in. So as we start to develop gifted and talented programs, one of the models we use where I work is having whole class push-in lessons. So I will work with the whole heterogeneous group of students and my colleague, and we teach fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration, and we name the way that we are approaching it with those students. So on a regular ongoing basis, basically it's once a month throughout the entire school year, the students are developing their knowledge of divergent thinking, and they're developing an understanding of how to talk about their thinking. And it comes to a point where the teachers almost see it as embedded professional development, and they come to the expert in the building for suggestions and to kind of enrich what it is that they're already doing. I also think, as I said, the training is really critical for teaching other professionals how to implement these strategies. Most of these strategies, if not all of them, are not only fun for the students to engage with, but they're actually really fun to teach, because you do see those students light up when they understand something through the lens that they haven't typically looked at their work within school. So I think that speaks volumes too, is seeing the students be successful with the strategies that we're using with them.
Okay, great. And have the teachers that participated in this, have they seen the results? Have they personally seen those strategies and the effectiveness of them?
Absolutely. In fact, when they were calling me throughout the course of the 8-week study, they were so excited. They just had to call me and share with me some of the results that they were getting with their students. And it was very refreshing each week to jump on that Zoom meeting with all the teacher facilitators, and having them collaborate and talk about, well, I found this resource and I found this, and this is how I changed it so it fits within the structure that I trained these teachers in. So they did definitely share their progress with their students. I've heard some very specific success stories with some of the facilitators' specific students. As I said, they did collaborate. So I do feel like it's contagious, and it is something that the teachers are thrilled to share. And in fact, one facilitator I'm thinking of right now had shared with me that one of her classes homeroom teacher noticed some changes in the students' work.
Phenomenal. Maybe a mixed methodology study next, so you could use those qualitative responses you had, huh? I
Yeah.
also really loved at the end your recommendations and the ways you could go, and there are so many ways that you could go with this. When you talk about, for example, the work of E. Paul Torrance and the fluency, flexibility, originality, and what's the other one?
Collaboration.
Elaboration. I have to think about that a second. And getting that into the classroom. So I really would stress that's where we go next with this, or where you go next. The opportunities are unlimited with that. And because we have so many people here that would like to probably make comments or ask you questions, I will save those really technical comments for our continued discussion. It has just been my pleasure, Meredith, working with you the last couple of years, and seeing you carry that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. I really appreciate all your work with Meredith. You are truly a subject matter expert with this study, and I like how you kind of ask, in terms of what's next for her. So that's super fantastic. I want to go into a slightly different direction. I notice we have a lot of students on here and other individuals, family, friends, coworkers. But Meredith, the question I have for you is that during this whole process, and put your your former student hat on. What kind of advice would you give your fellow students on this call? I see some previous boot campers on here. I see a lot of different people that I know, and they're students. When you were working through this whole process, besides putting up with me, what are some of the really important key points that you did that you felt were absolutely imperative to finish this study and to finish so strong?
So during the dissertation phase, I do feel like it was a team effort. I do feel like the ongoing communication, and I felt supported by my committee. I think that's really important. And I realize that's not necessarily something students can control, but I do think that those relationships are really important. So doing whatever you can. I had a phenomenal group of friends. I called them my squad. We were always on Zoom together and always supporting each other. So if you can find people that will support you the same way, I definitely suggest doing that. I would also say to keep your passion in focus. The dissertation process can be very arduous, very tedious at times. There were times, I can tell you, proofreading the dissertation took as long, if not longer, than coming up with the synthesis and the original information in the first place. And it's just being patient with myself and being patient with yourself, and just knowing that the final outcome should really convey your passion. And I think that's really important too.
Excellent, excellent. I just have to share with everyone, Meredith is an extremely self-directed student. What that means is she never stops. She just doesn't do an assignment and wait till the next week to do the next one. She's always working on her dissertation, her research. Why do I know this? Because she would text me several days in a row, and that's really good stuff. Am I doing this right? What do you think about this, Dr. A? Yada, yada, yada. She kept moving. And sometimes students fall into that kind of trap where I did my assignment, I'm done for the week. That is not a doctoral student. A doctoral student doesn't stop until they're at this defense. And then it's really just getting started, to Dr. Davis's point. Many of you know that I'm a kind of a quantitative guy, but I do think this now has tremendous opportunities to follow up with some qualitative research, to really dive in now qualitatively. So Meredith has a extremely bright future with presenting, publishing, working with Dr. Davis, and maybe even me, if she can still put up with me that much longer. But all kidding aside, I want to make sure that all of you on the call knew it's been an absolute pleasure working with Meredith. I learned a tremendous amount. And it was so wonderful that Dr. Davis was on her committee, because she truly is a subject matter expert with this. So the whole team truly worked. But in the end, Meredith is the one who did the work. She pulled it all together and got it done. She is a true representative of herself, a professional, and now National University. And I want to be the first to congratulate her as Dr. Meredith Thomas.
Congratulations, Dr. Thomas. It has been.
Congratulations, Dr.
pleasure.
Thomas.
Thank you.